The Guardians advancing to the ALCS, Lane Thomas hitting a grand slam to help put the Guardians on top of the Detroit Tigers. 7-3 the final score. Tarek Skubal struggled only in that fifth inning, really. The Tigers were able to put him back out there for one more, so they kind of did what they wanted minus that fifth inning. We'll talk about all of that later on in the show, along with a preview of Game 1 of the ALCS, which is tonight, by the way, against the New York Yankees in the Bronx. Also, the Browns are a dumpster fire, but everything on paper says they shouldn't be. I'm going to go into all that, along with my thoughts on Week 6 so far, plus more thoughts on the Ohio State Buckeyes and that heartbreaking loss to Oregon, and why I think Ohio State was the better team, but not the better coach team. All that and more. Welcome to Raw Takes with Andrew Hoty. Raw Takes with Andrew Hoty. If you like this show, as always, like and subscribe, comment below. Let me know your thoughts as I give you my raw takes. I want to know what you have to say too. We're going to start doing some mentions on the show later on here as well. If you comment on the video, you may have an opportunity to have your reaction be brought to you here on Raw Takes. Also, make sure to check me out on social media. As always, you can find me on Facebook, Raw Takes with Andrew Hoty, Twitter/X. You can check me out at Hoty Andrew. That's my personal X account where I give out my sports thoughts, and you can also catch the latest updates on Raw Takes there. Plus, you can find me on Instagram too, at Hoty Raw Takes for my reels, for the link to this YouTube channel, and so much more. You got to follow the show on social media here at Raw Takes with Andrew Hoty. Hope everyone had a great weekend, especially for those in Ohio, with at least the Guardians news. And I'll even throw Cincinnati in there. The Bengals won a pretty big game against the Giants, and the Reds just hired Terry Francona, so things in Cincinnati are looking pretty up and up right now. But back to Cleveland, where I'm at, in Northeast Ohio. Outside of the Guardians, it was a rougher weekend in Ohio sports. But the Buckeyes with a heartbreaking loss. We'll talk about that later on in the show. Let's get right into some football, and I'm going to just explain why the Browns are a complete disaster. They can't throw the football. Deshaun Watson stinks. I mean, there's just no way around it now. He's not the Deshaun Watson of old. The offensive line stinks. They're missing Bill Callahan. That's a big part of it. And they're missing a lot of guys on that offensive line. When have we last seen Jack Conklin play a full season? I mean, it's just getting ridiculous at this point. You look at the fact that they can't really run the football very well or effectively, consistently, but that may change when Nick Chubb gets back. I think Pierre Strong looked really good yesterday. And as I keep saying, I don't know what Kevin Stefanski's glue to Jerome Ford is, because I think after yesterday we see Pierre Strong run the football a little bit, and Deontay Foreman to a degree, a lot better than Jerome Ford has ran it the last 2 seasons. So I kind of question the running game skill there. Coaching-wise, a disaster. I'm not for firing Stefanski, as I've mentioned numerous times, but something about Ken Dorsey just doesn't feel right. And you look at the way Buffalo's offense is going compared to the Browns' offense, and the Browns' offense, after Buffalo let go of Ken Dorsey, it seemed like their problems kind of dissipated, and now you look at the Browns, and all those problems are brought upon here. It's an absolute mess. The penalties are ridiculous. This is an undisciplined football team, which we never usually see from Kevin Stefanski coach teams. So something somewhere isn't going right in terms of team discipline, because this team is getting penalty after penalty after penalty, and maybe you could say Deshaun Watson's mobility style increases the amount of holds, but I mean, come on, we had an OPI yesterday, we had a holding call, we had a face mask, we had stupid penalties. And also, Amari Cooper is just not the Amari Cooper of old. I think since the Brandon Ayuk news came out earlier this fall, I just think late summer, one of those time periods it was around, I think Amari Cooper has lost interest in playing in Cleveland. I think the Browns letting that kind of get to the media demotivated Amari Cooper to a degree. So that's why I don't think Amari Cooper is producing the same way, because I think he's hoping the Browns go to a fire sale and we start trading everybody off. It's getting bad. It's 1-5. No one thought 1-5, I think, at 6 games in the season. I think we thought worst case 2-4 and we could rebound, or 3-3, maybe 4-2. Nobody thought 1-5. I mean, you're one game away from being a complete winless team. You just are. I mean, the only win is against the Jacksonville Jaguars, who proved to be terrible yesterday in London. And Doug Peterson, I keep saying he's going to get fired, and it might be next week because they play another game in London, but he's done as the Jacksonville Jaguars head coach. That's a bad season, too, for a team with high expectations. But you just look at the fact that the Browns, everything about them stinks. It's just a disaster. They're just terrible all around. there's nothing I could say or do that really just puts a light on anything. I mean, defensively, Myles Garrett looks like a total stud. We saw him block that field goal yesterday, and you just said to yourself, like, holy crap, Myles Garrett's really, really good football player, but he's on a 1-5 team. So I'm at a point with what's the point of keeping him? And listen, this is going to be painful for me to say because I love Myles Garrett. I love Nick Chubb. I love Amari Cooper at the end of the day because of what he did last year. It stinks that he's demotivated a little bit, but it is what it is. I love Jerry Jeudy. I love guys on the defense like Jeremiah Owusu-Koramoah. I wanted the Browns to draft him. They did, and he's a cold-blooded stud. I love JOK. He's one of my favorite players on the Browns. I mean, Denzel Ward even, the hometown boy. One of my favorite players on the Browns right now, too. I mean, there's so many players I love. David Njoku, of course. The Chief. I love the Chief. And he looks like he could be making some good catches, but the utilization of him is not good. And that's partially because he's been hurt, too. So, I mean, it just looks like this team is heading towards a total fire sale. And we're going to be seeing a lot of those guys who we've come to know and love, especially last year, go. It's terrible. This team is too talented to be 1-5. But you look at them at 1-5 and you say to yourself, they're 1-5. And Deshaun Watson's quarterbacking this team. And Kevin Stefanski's the coach. Everything about this team should be good. And they're terrible. There's problems galore. So is it time to start a rebuild and have a fire sale and trade off Njoku, trade off Chubb, trade off Myles Garrett, trade off JOK, get rid of all these guys and just start a rebuild? I am hesitant to say yes. But the record says yes. And the reason the record says yes is because it's 1-5. This team is going in a nowhere direction. It's time to just move off some of these pieces and get things going and just start a rebuild. It might be that time. Now, I will say this too. Another thing you could look at is you could say, well, division play starts next week. We play Cincinnati at home. We have the Baltimore Ravens after that. Things could turn around if you're 3-5 and you have all these AFC opponents left. And if you have a very good record in the AFC, which at this point the Browns would need to have a very good AFC record with the schedule they have left in order to make the postseason anyway, you just give it a few more weeks and see if you can get close to 500. Maybe you do that. But is it really worth it? Because you're likely going to miss the playoffs anyway. I don't know. I really don't know. The Browns are a mess. Everything about them's a mess. Now, I don't want to say fire everybody either, but you look at Andrew Berry's draft picks, and you could say outside of maybe JOK, there's not really a guy that shines out to you as someone that really is a great football player for the Browns, minus JOK, who was a second-round pick in 2021. I can't really name one. Jedrick Wills has not proven to be that guy, even though I don't think Jedrick Wills is as bad as a lot of people say, but I don't think he's very good either. And it's tough to take over the former Joe Thomas position. I think the Browns are just in the gutter. This is terrible. It's a horrible situation to be in, and it's mainly because you're paying your quarterback $230 million in guaranteed money, and he's not performing well at all. And I don't want to just blame the quarterback because you look at the offensive line, it's not good. You look at the running game, it's not consistent. Coaching clearly is an issue, at least from the offensive coordinator. I'm not so sure it is all on the head coach. I mean, not only are you wasting players like Njoku, players like Myles Garrett, JOK, Amari Cooper, Nick Chubb, who is about to come back, but you're essentially wasting him because you're giving him a 1-5 season. Not only are you wasting all that, but you're wasting great coaches. You're essentially wasting Kevin Stefanski. You're wasting Jim Schwartz, who I think is an all-time great defensive coordinator. You're wasting these guys' time because it's a disaster. And Kevin Stefanski has shown how adaptable he is. Like, look, I changed my entire staff to try to adapt to Deshaun Watson. But little do we realize how many of those guys worked last season. I personally think Stum Mitchell is one of the best running back coaches the Browns have had in a long time. Why did we get rid of him? There was no reason to fire him. We fired our tight end coach last year. Why? David Njoku was great last year, and Harrison Bryant was a very solid backup. Clearly, Bryant went over to Las Vegas, so that ended up not being the situation where he stayed here. But at the same time, though, tight end room was really good. Why did you do that? I think Njoku's the third best tight end in football. And also look at Bill Callahan leaving. I mean, that obviously hurts. That one was not on the Browns. I think they would have rather Bill Callahan stayed, but he went to go coach with his son, and all props to him, but it's hurting the Browns significantly. And they fired all these other guys. I mean, Alex Van Pelt ran a pretty good offense last year. How soon do we forget the Baltimore game last year in Baltimore where we won 33-31, where Deshaun Watson went 14 for 14 in the second half, was under Alex Van Pelt. And then he coached a really good Joe Flacco offense. That offense was taking off prior to Joe Flacco. Deshaun Watson, if he didn't get hurt, maybe would have been a superstar quarterback. And we changed the entire staff around. And it's a mess. And I don't know if that was Stefanski's decision or if that was Barry's decision or if that was Jimmy Haslam's decision. It was someone's decision. And they're liable for this mess that's on the field right now. I personally don't think it's all on Stefanski. I feel like somewhere he was receiving pressure to change the staff up to make it accustomed to Deshaun Watson. But we saw that this staff was kind of starting to get a little accustomed to Deshaun Watson last year. We also forget about the Arizona game last year that we won 27-0. I mean, that was the same coaching staff from the Joe Flacco offense. It's ridiculous. I think that there is some major problems within going on the Browns front office and maybe ownership that is just not out in the public right now because they're keeping it secret. There might be some friction between the Haslams and Stefanski and Barry, and it might cost the Browns this season. It might cost Stefanski and Barry their jobs. I hope it doesn't personally because I think they've done a tremendous job with the Browns, and it looked like to me Jimmy Haslam was taking that step back. But I mean, at the end of the day, this is an organization that also wants us to build them a new dome. They want us to build them a new dome. In Brook Park, which is a suburb outside of Cleveland, right by the airport. It's really close to the airport. They're about a few blocks down the road. But they want us to build a stadium there. Why do we deserve to build them a new dome stadium if this is the product they're going to give us? And if there is friction in the front office and the ownership, and I'll say this, people are going to take Stefanski and Barry's side in town. I don't think they're going to take Haslam's side. And it's because of the things like the Dome Project. And it's with all due respect because, listen, Haslam, he's been willing to spend the money on this roster. We clearly see it. But major mistakes keep getting made, and the Browns are still terrible. At the end of the day, this 1-5 start reminds me of the 1-31 time, where the Browns went 1-31 within a 2-year stretch. Now, I don't want to compare Kevin Stefanski to Hugh Jackson. Obviously, that would be ridiculous. But this is feeling very similar to that same old Browns mentality of the Browns will always find a way to screw it up. And they're coming off a playoff berth with a quarterback that they signed off the couch in a spectacular season that maybe should have never happened to begin with because of all the headlines that surround it. It's ridiculous. It's terrible. And the Houston Texans are laughing their ass off right now. Houston right now is partying like there's no tomorrow because they have a Super Bowl contending team possibly. When you look at C.J. Stroud, Tank Dell, Nico Collins, Stephon Diggs, I mean, Will Anderson, who's a great defensive end. I mean, they're laughing to the bank right now of, oh my God, the Browns just got duped by us for Deshaun Watson. And rightfully so. The Houston Texans should be laughing at us. And they beat us in a playoff game last year, too. That should resonate with the Cleveland Browns right now. It's a bad situation all around. And I'm not the guy to say tear it down and rebuild personally because I love all these players and, you know, we've gotten so attached to these guys over the years, especially from last year, that it would be hard to do that. But damn it, if we're going to win football games in the future, we may just need to bite our tongue here in Cleveland and go through another rebuilding process. Because we have a baseball team on the edge of a World Series, possibly, and we also have a Cavs team, young and upcoming, that could possibly do some damage this year. Maybe not a finals contender, but at least could give us some presentable good basketball. So there'll be two teams in town that we could look forward to watching as the Browns possibly go through another rebuild. It'll be tough, because I'm a football fan first, and I think a lot of people here in Cleveland would say it's a Browns town before anything. But you know what? If you're watching the Guardians right now, this team is rallying the fans. They're rallying the fans. Everyone's eccentric about them. You look at the Cavs. If the Cavs go on another run like they did last year in January or February, people are going to be showing up to Rocket Mortgage Fieldhouse with their Cavs gear on, and they're going to be going nuts. So, to me, I say maybe it's just time we bite the tongue and start a rebuild, and let's just enjoy what we could see from Donovan Mitchell and what we have going on with Jose Ramirez and the Guardians. And just go through the rebuild again, and in a few years, maybe the Cavs get worn down and the Guardians get worn down and the Browns will be our savior. I mean, I'm at a position where that just might be the best thing to do because that is too much guaranteed money going to the quarterback, and the Browns are showing no signs of fixing anything anytime soon. And I would hate to say it because if it does cost Kevin Stefanski and Andrew Barry their jobs, that would just be devastating. I said earlier on in the offseason when I just started Raw Takes, the number 10 coach I have on the hot seat is Kevin Stefanski, and this is why. And he shouldn't be on the hot seat because I think he's done a tremendous job for the Browns. unless this turns around this season, unless they get a win against Cincinnati and Baltimore at home, which they absolutely need to do and get themselves 2-0 in the division, I don't see a way you could turn this season around and it becomes an absolute fire sale. And no evidence to me shows they could beat either one of those teams. So the Browns are a mess. They're just a mess. Everything about them is bad, as I've mentioned. And we could talk about fire sales and rebuilding a little bit down the line. We have that game against Cincinnati coming up this weekend. Let's just look forward to it and bite the tongue because the Guardians are going to be playing the New York Yankees anyway here starting tonight. We'll talk a little bit about baseball in a few, but let's just reflect a little bit on Week 6. You look at the Baltimore Ravens toppling the Washington Commanders. I think this was due for the Commanders. They still have a lot of young players on that roster, and we think Baltimore's a really good team. So that game didn't surprise me one bit. I was a little bit surprised by the Tampa Bay-New Orleans game, not in terms of the Tampa Bay winning, but in terms of the fact they put up 51 points. And Browns fans are just going to be pissed about that because Baker Mayfield looks like a great quarterback in this league. I don't want to say he's the best quarterback in this league or a top-tier quarterback, but he's probably right below top tier. He's good. He's showing it. And the NFC is not as loaded as the AFC in my view, but I mean, if you look at Baker Mayfield, the way he's playing football, they're the only team that's beaten the Detroit Lions. And I think the Detroit Lions right now, after what they did to Dallas yesterday, are the best team in the NFC. I can't believe I'm saying that because of the Lions' history. But, I mean, that team is loaded. Everything about them is just ecstatic and fun. And Dan Campbell's is great to watch coach in his press conferences just because of how wild he is and fun he seems like to be playing for. Like, the players play their asses off for that guy, and it shows on the field. And Dan Campbell, for as great of a coach as he is, that Detroit Lions team really built the culture around his personality. And you look at Jared Goff, the way he's kind of turned his career around. You look at that, I keep going back to that Rams-Lions trade from a few years ago with Stafford and Goff and how it paid off for both teams. It's great what's going on in Detroit. Now, it does hurt that Aiden Hutchinson got hurt as well, though. And it looks like he's going to miss a lot of the season. So hopefully Aiden Hutchinson gets back to it. But the Detroit Lions right now, they're possibly the kings of the NFC. They look that good. And you look at Minnesota, as I said, I still believe that their undefeated season so far is a little bit fraudulent and that they're going to get punched in the mouth at some point. We'll see if it happens just because it's Sam Darnold, and I'm not so sure he could sustain a full season in the NFL. But damn it, I mean, you look at a guy like Kevin O'Connell, he is coaching that team incredibly well. I mean, the Minnesota Vikings are absolutely on fire. They're a great football team to watch in terms of how they're winning those football games against the Jets, against the Texans, who they absolutely destroyed. And I think the Texans are coming close to being Super Bowl contenders. And they had a bye week this week, but Minnesota is definitely a team that has surprised a lot of people. And they do have great players, but I still just don't think the 5-0 season makes sense for them. And they play Detroit next week, so I'm actually excited to see how that turns out. Because if Detroit wins it, they could essentially control their own destiny in the NFC North and possibly the NFC. Green Bay smacked Arizona yesterday. Green Bay, I think, is getting back to the offense we expected to with Jordan Love, especially after the Rams win last week. I'm excited to see Green Bay down the stretch because I love watching Jordan Love and I love watching how young that team and their core is. And I think Green Bay has a very bright future ahead of them. I still don't think they're going to be able to compete with the Detroit Lions in that division, though. I just think the Lions are a lot better team, but the Green Bay Packers are going to get to a point where they will be competing for division titles with the Detroit Lions and possibly the Minnesota Vikings if they keep it up. The Chicago Bears destroyed Jacksonville in London. I mean, Caleb Williams has had some moments. I might be starting to be wrong on how bad I thought he was going to be, but it just doesn't feel right. Something about the Bears is going to fall apart at some point later this season. They're going to go on a massive losing streak. They have a lot of rookies. And at this point, not only did they get Caleb Williams, they also essentially passed on Jaden Daniels, and Washington's eating that up right now. And I think Washington's going to end up having a better season than Chicago. So, and that also goes to say I think they traded away a good quarterback in Justin Fields. But you know what? The more Pittsburgh remains average, the more it's possible. But Pittsburgh looked pretty good yesterday in Las Vegas, and Justin Fields seems to be figuring out a little bit of a rhythm. So the Pittsburgh Steelers might be drinking the Bears' tears at some point if Caleb Williams does fall apart and Matt Eberflus does get fired at the end of the year, like I think is very possible. So that's still to be determined for the Pittsburgh Steelers and the Chicago Bears. But that trade, I'm not so sure it worked out. As for the Jacksonville Jaguars, who got blown out by Chicago, they're done. Their season's over. Trevor Lawrence, I know a lot of people are saying he's regressed. I think it's all coaching. I think Trevor Lawrence still has really good quarterback potential in him, and he needs another head coach. Doug Peterson got him back to where he needed to be, because when you look at the start of Trevor Lawrence's career with Jacksonville, it was a disaster. But Doug Peterson's scheme just seems to be getting old and played out. And you already look at a guy like DeMeco Ryans in the division, and DeMeco Ryans has already turned the Houston Texans around within 1 year. I mean, the guy was a rookie head coach with a rookie quarterback and has a playoff win on his resume within a year. DeMeco Ryans is the best coach right now in that division. It's not Doug Peterson. The Jacksonville Jaguars are a mess and they're going nowhere. They got to fire Doug Peterson and start to rebuild on this season because Trevor Lawrence is a good quarterback who's just in a horrible, horrible situation. That's my view on that team. You look at the Houston Texans and how they blew out New England yesterday. Obviously, we know what New England is. Their one win against Cincinnati is probably a surprise to a lot of people now. But at the end of the day, that's all. That's all they have. They're terrible. So the Houston Texans absolutely destroying them, and them getting a win over the Buffalo Bills last week was everything that the Houston Texans need to verify themselves as a legitimate threat to possibly come out of the AFC. Will they topple Kansas City? I pretty much doubt that. I don't think, as I said in the last Raw Takes, that anyone's going to topple Kansas City until it actually happens. But Houston Texans, I think, are a team that could possibly do that. I think they're going to win the regular season meeting later this year and possibly contend for the number 1 seed. But I don't think the Houston Texans, by any stretch, are going to beat the Kansas City Chiefs in a playoff game. I just think that's not going to happen. But it's fun to watch the Houston Texans build that program back up because they were a disaster for those few short years without Deshaun Watson there, and then they got back to where they are now. And the Browns are kind of the ones dealing with that battle. The Houston Texans rebuilt like that, and the Browns may need to start a rebuild within this year. So Houston, they're just in really good position right now, and they're obviously the better team in Texas over the Dallas Cowboys, who Mike McCarthy may get fired today. It was Jerry Jones' birthday. I don't know. As I'm recording this, Mike McCarthy hasn't been fired. I don't think he deserves to get fired. I just think the Detroit Lions are way better than the Dallas Cowboys. So, with that being said, the Dallas Cowboys are kind of a mess right now, and they have to play Washington soon. Washington looks like the best team in that division. I'm just going to be honest with you. When you look at Philadelphia and the way they're playing football right now, it's still streaky, and they played the Browns, who I don't think are very good. So I'm not so sure I'm sold on Philadelphia and Nick Sirianni and Jalen Hurts. I'm not so sure I'm sold on the Cowboys either. I'm starting to buy into Washington stock in the NFC East. And the Giants obviously looked awful against the Bengals, but I thought the Giants would be a lot better. So that's a darn shame. But you look at the rest of the AFC North, too. As I said, Baltimore, getting to the Baltimore we saw last year. After the 0-2 start, I expected that. They were going to blow out some really good opponents, and I think they're starting to rally. The Steelers obviously blew out the Raiders. Steelers looking like a pretty good team and probably a wild card. Cincinnati, I think, is that team that's going to kind of start to figure things out later this year and get back to the wild card race. Because Cincinnati, their offense is too good to be 2-4 right now. And they honestly should be 3-3 if they had someone that could just hold the damn football for the kicker. And they didn't. And that game was ridiculous that they blew to the Baltimore Ravens. The Ravens shouldn't have won that game, but they did. And so now the Ravens are in the driver's seat, the Bengals are in third place, and the Steelers are in second, and the Browns could just keep drinking their tears because the Browns can't even compete with those other three. It's a damn shame for Browns fans here in Northeast Ohio. Worry about the baseball team and the basketball team for now while the Browns figure things out here. I also like to say the Tennessee Titans and the Colts. That game was interesting, too, with Joe Flacco at the helm. But Joe Flacco played in the Colts game yesterday against the Titans in Nashville, and the Titans are just a bad team. Colts got it done, and they're kind of rallying around Joe Flacco right now. I mean, Joe Flacco, since he came off the couch, I think his presence has just been so good for a lot of the younger players, especially a guy like Anthony Richardson. Anthony Richardson, if he's playing with Joe Flacco, imagine all the experience he's going to learn from a guy who's been across this league on numerous teams now, who's won a Super Bowl and is a Super Bowl MVP. Joe Flacco's only been one and done in the playoffs once, and it was last year against the Houston Texans when he was with Cleveland Brown. So Joe Flacco is a guy who's definitely turned his career around. I think a lot of us in Cleveland are rooting for him. And I always like to remind Cleveland fans this, because I was for not signing Joe Flacco back, and I'm fine with Jameis Winston. Joe Flacco, at age 40, is not going to have much of a career left. So just take it for what it is. He only has a few more seasons. And the other thing is, too, never forget, before Joe Flacco last season, what he did to this organization when he was a Baltimore Raven and a New York Jet and every other team he played for. He was 18-3 against the Browns all time. That's insane. Absolutely insane. 18-3 against the Browns all time. He did a lot of pain to the Browns. Browns fans everywhere were devastated by Joe Flacco. Numerous Sundays. I was devastated by Joe Flacco. So even though last year was a tremendous story, don't forget that about the past. But either way, Indianapolis getting the win. A very good moment for Joe Flacco and the Indianapolis Colts to kind of keep themselves on track. And I think Anthony Richardson is going to be developing really well. And they're another team, too, that could be in the bubble wildcard conversation. But I think just based on Cincinnati's offense, we'll see Cincinnati start to make a little bit of a later run. I think the Cincinnati Bengals are the 1-1-14 we could see actually probably rebound. I don't think we're going to see it with Jacksonville, Cleveland, or New England at all, especially New England, or Cleveland at this point. And there was a lot of buys this week. I believe the Dolphins were on a bye week. I believe Minnesota had a bye week. So teams are starting to have buys at this point. And we're starting to really figure out who the good teams are, who the bad ones are. Obviously, if you look on paper right now, I'd say Baltimore's good. I'd say Pittsburgh's good. I'd say the Kansas City Chiefs, obviously. The Houston Texans. The Buffalo Bills and the New York Jets play tonight for division supremacy. I like the Jets in that game. Even though they fired Robert Saleh and they look kind of like a dumpster fire, I think Robert Saleh was wrongfully fired, personally. I think he was doing a really good job with the Jets' defense. So I don't know why that move came out. Maybe it was Aaron Rodgers. I don't want to speculate or give conspiracies to it, but I think that was an interesting move made by the Jets, and I think the Jets might get better from it on the standpoint of their offense. They also demoted Nathaniel Hackett, which I think was the right move too. I think Nathaniel Hackett's awful. I think Aaron Rodgers just likes him, and that's why he's there. But Aaron Rodgers can still run an offense, I think, pretty well when he's not turning the ball over, and he was a mess against Minnesota and London. I think he could turn it over this week a little bit less, and I think he could start to get this offense back on track because we know Aaron Rodgers in his career doesn't usually turn the ball over the way he has been. So I like the Jets at home to beat Buffalo, but I still think Buffalo in the long run is going to win that division and figure things out offensively and stay on top because Buffalo can essentially either blow you out or they'll just crumble. And I don't think they're going to crumble against the New York Jets, but I think that game's going to be close. And in a tight game, I would trust the Jets a little bit more because Buffalo has never really been great in recent years in tight games. So those are my thoughts so far on Week 6 of the NFL. Not all the games have been played yet. San Francisco also getting back on track with a win over Seattle on Thursday, but I was honestly watching baseball that night, so I didn't get to see too much about what was going on with San Francisco and Seattle because the Guardians won Game 4 of the ALDS. But those are my thoughts on Week 6 so far. Later this week, Week 7, my preview there, who may win the Thursday night game. Stay tuned on Raw Takes with Andrew Hoty because we'll have it right here for you. Before we move on to baseball, let's talk about the Ohio State Buckeyes and that loss to Oregon on Saturday. Ohio State, talent-wise, is clearly the better team over Oregon. Everything about them says they're better than Oregon. That was garbage that they lost that game. And you could look at the last few minutes. You obviously had the offensive pass interference, took you out of field goal range. Huge mistake. You essentially should have just ran out the clock there. You could also look at the fact Will Howard essentially ran out the clock on that one play. I think that was coaching. I don't know why Will Howard is doing that personally. And so Ryan Day going down to 2-6 against ranked opponents in the top 5, and it shows. Oregon was a much better coached team, a much better composed team. Dan Lanning clearly seems to know what he's doing. Ryan Day doesn't. And that's why I think Oregon won this football game by 1. Ohio State has the talent. They don't have the coach. Denzel Burke had the worst game of his career as a Buckeye. The defense couldn't stop a cold. It was terrible. It was terrible. The offense did plenty to win that game. And I put that on coaching. I don't know what Ryan Day's doing. I just don't. You have a guy like Trevion Henderson running the football too, and he ran it down Oregon's throats, and you couldn't win that ball game. Ryan Day is 2-6, as I've mentioned, against these top 5 opponents, and it shows. You lose 1-point games to Oregon. You're ranked number 2 in the country. Now, granted, you're in a position where it's not going to probably damage your season exponentially because of the 12-team playoff format. But damn. A 1-point loss to Oregon? It's a matchup I'd love to see again in the Big Ten Championship, possibly, because I think Oregon's beatable. But I think Oregon's better coached. I think Dan Lanning is 100% better than Ryan Day. 100%. And there's also that conspiracy theory going around that Dan Lanning put a 12th man on the field to waste 4 seconds of time on the clock, which led to Will Howard running out the clock. But still, Will Howard, outside of that dumb play at the end of the game, had a really good football game. I don't put the loss on him. I put it on coaching. I put it on defense. That was just a pathetic effort from the Buckeyes, And a loss like that is why I don't have confidence they could beat a Michigan later this season. A two-loss Michigan, too. I don't know if they could beat Penn State. And Penn State struggled against USC, but Penn State, to me, is the real deal this year. I could see the Buckeyes lose to Penn State. I really can. In Penn State. This might be the year it happens. The Buckeyes could be 9-3 at the end of the year. And I don't even remember the last time they had a 9-win or less season. It's been a long time. But I am very concerned about the Buckeyes after that loss to Oregon. And it just exploits why I'm concerned about them playing even Michigan. Because Michigan's owned them the last 3 years. And until they break through, I can pick Ohio State to beat them. Jim Harbaugh lists or not. It's bad. It really is bad. And it makes me want Urban Meyer back. It makes me want Jim Tressel back. Guys that can beat Michigan. Guys that compete for titles. Let me ask any Ohio State fan out there. Urban Meyer maybe randomly lost the game to Purdue every once in a while. Or randomly lost the game to Iowa once in a while. The guy was beating top 5 opponents like mad. He won a national title. His record against top 5 opponents was insane. Ryan Day not only can't beat Michigan, but he can't beat these top 5 opponents. 2-6. 2-6. It's bad. It really is bad. It's bad across the board. The Ohio State Buckeyes program, I don't even know if I recognize it from 5 years ago at this point. Because that program is long gone. That was an Urban Meyer program. And now it's a Ryan Day program, and it's a mess. And something needs to be done about it. And I would like to see the Buckeyes get an Ohio-grown head coach. Someone like a Mike Vrabel would be great. I don't know if Mike Vrabel would want to coach Ohio State. I've always said it'd be great for him, too, because he's an Ohio native and he's a former Buckeye. But if he got an NFL job, I could easily see him wanting to go get an NFL job instead. So I can't blame Mike Vrabel for that either. But that's a guy I would love to see coach the Buckeyes. A guy I think young guys would want to play for, who's tough, who's smart. I don't see that in Ryan Day. Ryan Day doesn't have that charisma for me. And Ryan Day clearly shows it with the players on the field. Will Howard's running out the clock with 6 seconds to go instead of throwing it to somebody. And these are college kids. These aren't professional athletes. That's why I put it on coaching. Ryan Day stinks. And the Buckeyes had no business losing that game. And Dan Lanning is laughing to the bank, beating Ohio State by 1 point. Because Dan Lanning is the better coach with less talent. He broke Ohio State on Saturday. All right, let's get to baseball and those Cleveland Guardians who toppled over the Detroit Tigers Game 5 thanks to a Lane Thomas grand slam off of Tarek Skubal, who is possibly the Cy Young candidate. I shouldn't say candidate. He's possibly the Cy Young winner. He's going to win the Cy Young at this point. I'm just saying that to, because it's not official yet. But I cannot believe that Lane Thomas was able to smack that ball into the stands off of Tarek Skubal after he hit by pitch Jose by accident and automatically scored a run for the Guardians. I mean, Tarek Skubal, I think, was a little rattled after he hit Jose by a pitch because I don't think he meant it, and that's probably why he gave up the home run on the first pitch to Lane Thomas. But Lane Thomas, I just want to give him a round of applause because I said some pretty bad things about Lane Thomas when he first got here and how bad he was, hitting, I believe, 188 at one point his first couple weeks with the Guardians, but he turned it around quickly in September and now are winning playoff games because of him. That's exactly what we need to see here in Cleveland. And Lane Thomas, doing a phenomenal job in that run, gave the Guardians a chance to play the New York Yankees for an opportunity to make a World Series appearance, to see either the Mets or the Dodgers. And the Mets looked bad yesterday, by the way. The Dodgers absolutely smoked them. So I'm a little nervous to see what happens if they do make the World Series, if they get the Dodgers. But the Yankees are vulnerable to me. We play them tonight in the Bronx. Alex Cobb's going to be starting. I like that move. I think Alex Cobb was a little shaky against Detroit, but I think he could shut down this lineup pretty well. Now, Aaron Judge and Juan Soto have essentially not been themselves in the postseason thus far. No home runs from either one, but Giancarlo Stanton has essentially been carrying the load for them because he had a home run against Kansas City, and New York has found enough offense to get things going, but that's all of why I think they're vulnerable. The Guardians have a good opportunity to possibly win this series. I really do think they could. I think it'll go 6 or 7 if they do win it, nevertheless. I think even if they lose it, it'll go 6 and 7. This is a team I think will compete with them, and it's essentially like a rivalry in a sense. I think people in New York care about facing the Guardians. I think, obviously, the Red Sox are the big one, but the Guardians, to them, there's some bad blood between these two teams. They had a lot of postseason appearances together, and we haven't beaten them since 2007 in the postseason, so that's another opportunity for the Guardians to kind of break through and shut down the Yankees. And the biggest concerns I have, though, will be pitching-wise, because That bullpen was gassed in that Detroit series. We literally used them all the way to the last leg. So that makes me a little bit more nervous. I want to see Alex Cobb get to 6 innings tonight because of that. Before we get to the Cade Smith, Hunter Gaddis, Emmanuel Clase bullpen lineup. Because they were pretty gassed in that Detroit series by the end of it. I want to see Alex Cobb get 6 innings going. He could let up a run, maybe 2 if the Guardians are scoring some runs too. Outside of Garrett Cole, I don't really like the Guardians pitching. I think we saw the Royals go a little silent offensively. Bobby Witt Jr. didn't really do too much in that series for the Royals for them to overtake the Yankees either. So the best players in the Royals-Yankees series were kind of shut down. And you can't say that about the ALDS with the Guardians and Tigers. The Guardians' best players kind of came to light. We saw David Fry have some moments, and he's an all-star at the end of the day. I think he shouldn't have been an all-star personally, but he's an all-star at the end of the day and showed why in that series. I mean, Lane Thomas, obviously, with 2 huge home runs, including a grand slam off an ace pitcher in this league. Lane Thomas is obviously the MVP of that series. You look at Jose Ramirez. Jose Ramirez showed up in the Game 4 game against Detroit and played really well and hit that home run. You look at Brian Rocchio showing up to the plate. Now, I've said this recently, I think Brian Rocchio needs to be the shortstop of the future, and maybe the Guardians down the line look at trading Andres Jimenez when Travis Bazzana comes up. But we'll talk about that later. Brian Rocchio showed up and proved he could be the real deal, and that he's learned a lot from this season in the ALDS. No home runs, but he's hitting contact with the ball. He's making plays happen. He got a hit off Tarek Skubal, too, and he's a bottom-of-the-order guy. And it's great to have a guy like that at the bottom of the order when guys like Kwan can come back up to bat, who also has gotten back to his old self in the postseason so far. Stephen Kwan's been phenomenal. Josh Naylor, to a degree, he hasn't been a game-changing player, but Josh Naylor's gotten it done. Austin Hedges is a great clubhouse guy, but no, offensively, he's not really your juggernaut. Bo Naylor, kind of the same thing. You look at Big Christmas, not really making huge plays either, but defensively, he's been phenomenal. I think that's just great for the Guardians, and this is a real good baseball team right now. Now, Alex Cobb starting, I think, is also good for a guy like Tanner Bybee, who you might want to use in Game 2 or Game 3. Matthew Boyd needs a little bit more rest, too. You might want to use him in Game 3 or 4. I think you're getting a lot of those pitchers some really good rest here. And I think the Guardians, what I want to see them do is start to use some different guys in the bullpen. We saw Joey Cantillo once. Bring him back out there. Why not Gavin Williams? Give Gavin Williams a few innings. That's a guy that can probably get 2 or 3 innings for you out of the bullpen. Gavin Williams probably isn't going to start any games, so why not? And you also look at the fact you could pitch around some of these guys. Now, hopefully, Stephen Vogt has learned from the series with the Yankees earlier in August that you don't have to pitch to Aaron Judge. You don't have to pitch to Juan Soto. Pitch around those guys, get outs other ways, make some double plays happen, and get the Yankees out that way. This is not a very good New York Yankees team. They have 3 very, very good players in Garrett Cole and Aaron Judge and Juan Soto. 3 very, very good players, don't get me wrong. But other than that, there's not much here. And their bullpen stinks. You have the bullpen advantage right off the rip. The Guardians could get to the World Series. I really think they could. I think it's going to be hard because they have 3 of the best players in baseball on the Yankees. But we didn't see them show up against Kansas City. Check that. We saw Garrett Cole show up against Kansas City. We did not see Juan Soto or Aaron Judge show up against Kansas City. We saw Giancarlo Stanton show up. And that's another dangerous thing now, too. Giancarlo Stanton can hit a home run and put the Yankees in prime position to win a ball game. It's possible. So, yeah, I think if you're the Guardians right now, you're going to have to look at pitching around Soto and Judge to the best of your ability. You're probably going to have to pitch to one of the 2. Pick your poison, essentially, at some point. Breaking through to Garrett Cole to a degree. We saw in the game against Kansas City, he allowed 1 run. You can do it. This is not the Garrett Cole we saw in Houston years ago, but he's still Garrett Cole, and you're going to want to make some plays on him when you can. He's still the guy you don't want to face if you are the Guardians, but you're going to at some point. And just make some plays defensively. If you're Brian Rocchio, keep doing what you're doing. If you're Stephen Kwan, keep making plays on the ball. This offense came to life, and not game 2 and 3, but in games 1, 4, and 5, and that's why you win ball games, essentially. And you have the better bullpen hands down, who can lock down a lot of these guys. So, yeah, if I'm the Guardians right now, you can easily break through and win this series. Now, I shouldn't say easily, but you can break through and win this series. It'll probably be in 6 and 7, but you can do it. It's possible. I don't know if I'm going to pick the Guardians to win this series just yet. I think after game 1, I'll have my official prediction on how far I think it goes because I want to see the pitching matchups. I want to see how Alex Cobb looks tonight. I think the Guardians should have the edge here because Garrett Cole's not on full rest. As I'm recording this, the Yankees have not announced their starting pitcher yet, so we'll see who it is. If it's a guy like Nestor Cortez, for example, maybe. I mean, I like our odds against Nestor Cortez because I don't think he's been the Nestor Cortez of old, and the Guardians broke through to him in one game, I believe, earlier this year. So, well, yeah, we'll see what the Guardians are able to do. I think it's possible they could win this series and get to the World Series. I think it's possible. If they get the Dodgers, that's another story. If they get the Mets, I'd be a lot happier. But you know what? Major League Baseball should be happy right now because they're guaranteed to get a New York or LA team in the World Series either way. I think they're not thrilled that Cleveland's the one team that's in this 4-team mix, but honestly, at this point, Major League Baseball should care less about it because, you know what, they're getting a big market team in the World Series anyway at this point. Just see who the best team is of these 4. We got some good baseball that's going to be taking place throughout the next month, and I'm excited to see who wins this World Series either way. Hopefully it's not the Yankees. That's my one hope. And if the Guardians make the World Series, hopefully they win it against either the Dodgers or the Mets. Obviously, I'll root for either the Dodgers or the Mets if the Yankees get to the World Series, but we'll see. It's great to have this kind of October baseball back, and I can't wait to see who wins the whole darn thing. And if the Guardians do it, first title since 1948, and this town will be jumping for joy, especially based on how the Browns look, and it'll just be a great way to end the fall, essentially, is to have a Guardians World Series title. This town will go nuts. So I'm hoping for that, but it's still going to be very hard. We got some really good baseball teams out there, including this one with the New York Yankees. It's time to worry about today. Let's focus on getting Game 1 in the Bronx. That's it for today's edition of Raw Takes with Andrew Hoty. Stay tuned later this week for my thoughts on Week 7 of the NFL season, what may go on with the Ohio State Buckeyes. The Cavs season's upcoming. We'll preview a little bit more about the Cavs. We'll also talk a little bit more about the Guardians and the ALCS and the NLCS. It's going to be an exciting October, a lot of sports taking place. And maybe we'll talk some more Browns and the disaster it is. Hopefully they don't fire sale everything and they get a win against Cincinnati later this week. But who knows? It's probably not going to happen, and it's going to be a rough season either way. But we can always keep our hopes high. As we say here in Cleveland, there's always next year. But in 2023, the season we had, I say there's always last year. I'm Andrew Hoty. Those are my Raw Takes. Hope you have a good one. And we'll be back later this week for more of my thoughts on sports. Have a good one, everybody.